Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Lidar Velazian. Coming up in today's newscast. The political rhetoric heating up as Prime Minister Netanyahu and other top lawmakers trying to restore a sense of calm to the public. And Prime Minister Binyamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant tour Israel's northern border and issue a stern warning to Iran. And a new report reveals Israel's tech sector taking a hard hit in 2022. As rhetoric and heated debate over the new government's proposed reforms continues to rise, Prime Minister Netanyahu and other top lawmakers increasing their efforts to calm the public and restore sensibility. ILTV's Aaron Porras with the details.
Prime Minister Binyamin Netanyahu on Tuesday night condemning the call of MK Tzvika Fogel, a member of the Otzma Yehudit party, to arrest former Prime Minister Yair Lapid and former Defense Minister Benny Gantz. Netanyahu saying that in a democratic country, the leaders of the opposition are not arrested, just as the government ministers are not called Nazis, the Jewish government isn't called the Third Reich, and the citizens are not called to start civil rebellion. As such, the comments calling for calm then not only from his own coalition partners like MK Fogel, but from opposition lawmakers who are making such comparisons against his new government. Likewise calling to restore order, firebrand National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, the head of the Otzma Yehudit party, who also condemned the calls for arrest, saying the police will not arrest political opponents. It doesn't work that way. In an interview with the Israeli Ynet News, Ben-Gvir adding that he understands the resentment and calls for arrest, but that we shouldn't go in a, quote, wrong and inappropriate direction. I call on everyone who is interviewed not to talk about this matter, not about handcuffs nor arrests. No political opponent is going to be arrested. Meanwhile, Israeli President Isaac Herzog issuing a statement Tuesday night following public criticism of his silence on the public and political discourse. Herzog assuring the public that the values of the Declaration of Independence are the compass of the country and that he will not allow them to be harmed. He said this was a sensitive and explosive period, and he adds that he is aware of all the voices, pains, worries, and anxieties in the Israeli public. The Israeli president says that in the last few days, he's been holding talks with many parties to bring about the existence of a dignified and respectful dialogue in order to reach as broad an understanding as possible. And he appeals to the elected officials and citizens of Israel alike, calling on them to show restraint and responsibility, saying, quote, "We must calm the spirits and lower the flames." Despite the cries for sensibility, however, furious debate still reverberating in response to the coalition's proposals for judicial reform. Likud MK and Justice Minister Yariv Levin and Simcha Rotman from the Religious Zionism Party introducing their proposals to the Knesset Legal Committee on Wednesday morning against a chorus of angry backlash. Among the proposals, the override clause, which enables a simple majority in Knesset to overturn high court rulings over controversial legislation. Further, the court will be obliged to reach a special majority just to attempt an intervention on basic laws. And finally, reforms would inject more political influence into the court by giving the ruling government control over judicial selection, as well as nixing legal advisors appointed to ministers by the Attorney General's office.
And joining us now with more on the political and social tensions is Gil Hoffman, Executive Director of Honest Reporting and former Jerusalem Post political analyst. Hi, Gil. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure being with you, Lidar.
So a lot to discuss today. Let's start with the political discourse. You know, Netanyahu, Herzog, even Ben-Gvir trying to calm the tensions. They don't seem to be having too much of an effect. I mean, what are your thoughts on this?
It's only going to intensify as the legal reforms are implemented and as they're brought to crucial votes in the Knesset. There are strong points of view on both sides. Both sides believe that if their view does not win out, it causes tremendous damage to the future of the state of Israel. And the fact that they're using such strong language from the get-go just shows how intense this is going to get over time.
Now, the leaders of the opposition have decided on organizing and raising social protests. Netanyahu saying some are even calling for civil disobedience. Is this legitimate, opposition actions, or is this, a delegitimization of the government?
No, demonstrating is very legitimate, and they do that no matter who's in power. I just don't know how effective it is, Lidar. the way to have an impact is in the Knesset, to sit in long meetings of the Knesset Law and Constitution Committee and recommend changes and compromises to moderate the attempts by the government to make changes in the governmental legal system all in one gulp. I think that perhaps the government could be convinced that while they move ahead, even full speed ahead, that they add some caution, do some things gradually, not try to get all their demands together. But that'll only really work if they're negotiating at the table, and no one wants to negotiate with someone who calls for civil rebellion.
Now, you've been covering the Knesset. You covered the Knesset for many, many years at the Jerusalem Post. You've seen your fair share of disagreements in the Israeli parliament. Do you recall a time that the rhetoric was so intense from the get-go, as you said?
Sure, of course. The head of the Rabin assassination and every single attempt to pass anything in the Oslo Accords. But that was about trading land for peace, in theory, territorial compromise. That was the biggest controversial issue. Long before I came, there were debates about accepting reparations from Germany after the Holocaust. Those were the biggest fights in the history of Israeli politics that were much bigger than what's going on right now. And this is happening at a time when Israelis are not hyper-polarized, when the diplomatic, security, and economic issues, there's more or less agreement among all but the fringes in Israeli society. So when you have something that really does showcase and highlight the differences like this, it really stands out.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned, going back to the Rabin assassination. I mean, do you think Israel is headed down such a path again?
No, God forbid. That was very, very serious. Where the country was very divided, 50-50, and people believed that there's going to be mass death if the other side wins. Here, they're talking about the future of Israeli democracy. There's a lot of highly charged views, but in the end, we are one people, and there is a pendulum in Israeli politics. And I think people understand that you have to have healthy discourse in a democracy, even when you have strong opinions.
Mm-hmm. Now, moving on to Itamar Ben-Gvir, he's also tried to calm the public, saying that many of his proposed orders, such as ordering the police, for example, to take a harder line with anti-government protesters, was fake news, as he said. I mean, what can you tell us about this?
On that, he's right. Look, there have been protests on the left and on the right that use water cannons in order to bring order. And they decide whether to use those water cannons depending on the nature of the demonstration, not depending on the political point of view of the demonstration. Certain things he says for the cameras to reach accord with his constituency, he needs to be reminded that the campaign is over and that now he's the one who is running the public security of our country. And I think the press, both local and internationally, also need to realize that at times he still speaks like a politician on the campaign trail.
Now, you mentioned the international press. I mean, Israel getting a lot of bad press over this government's very right-wing policies, right-wing makeup. Do you think that sort of what's happening in Israel is having maybe a dangerous effect outside of the country in terms of how events here are being covered and reported outside of Israel?
Absolutely. The more we highlight differences and use very strong language, that will only make the entire world notice us more and write day in and day out about the health and the soul of Israeli democracy, and question our very existence. I think the legal reforms are kind of hard to explain abroad. If Israel was taking more steps to annex settlements, and that probably attract more news abroad. But the world is obviously looking at us. We're under the scrutiny of the world more than any country in the world, and my organization here, Honest Reporting, is monitoring to make sure that that doesn't cross the line into bias against Israel.